Thank You in Arabic by Naomi Shahib Nye. Shortly after my mother discovered my brother had been pitching his vitamin C tablets behind the stove for years, we left the country. Her sharp alert, "Now the truth be known," startled us at the breakfast table as she poked into the dim crevice with the nozzle of her vacuum. We could hear the pills go click, click, click up the long tube. My brother, an obedient child, a bright-eyed, dark-skinned charmer who scored high on all his tests and trilled a boy's sweet soprano, stared down at his oatmeal. 4 years younger than I, he was also the youngest and smallest in his class. Somehow he maintained an intelligence and dignity more notable than those of his older, larger companions, and the pills episode was really a pleasant surprise to me. Companions and mischief are not to be underestimated, especially when everything else in your life is about to change. We sold everything we had and left the country. The move had been brewing for months. We took a few suitcases each. My mother cried when the piano went. I wished we could have saved it. My brother and I had sung so many classics over its keyboard, "Look for the Silver Lining" and "Angels We Have Heard on High," that it would have been nice to return to a year later when we came straggling back. I sold my life-size doll and my toy sewing machine. I begged my mother to save her red stove for me so I could have it when I grew up. No one else we knew had a red stove, so my mother asked some friends to save it for me in the barn. Our parents had closed their imported gift stores. Our mother ran a little shop in our neighborhood in St. Louis, and our father ran a bigger one in a Sheraton hotel downtown. For years, my brother and I had been sitting with them behind the counters after school, guessing if people who walked through the door would buy something or only browse. We curled with our library books on Moroccan hassocks and Egyptian camel saddles. I loved the stacks of waiting tissue paper bags as they lay together in the reams of new tissue. I'd crease the folds as our smooth father in a dark suit and daily drench of cologne counted change. Our mother rearranged shelves and penned the perfect tags with calligrapher's ink. My brother and I helped unpack the crates, nested Russian dolls, glossy mother-of-pearl earrings from Bethlehem, a family of sandalwood fans nestled in shredded packaging. Something wonderful was always on its way. But there were problems, too. Sometimes whole days passed and nobody came in. It seemed so strange to wait for people to give you money for what you had, but that's what stores did everywhere. Then the stockroom filled with pre-Christmas inventory caught on fire and burned up, right when our father was between insurance policies. We could hear our parents in the living room, worrying and debating after we went to bed at night. Finally, they had to give the business up. What seemed like such a good idea in the beginning, presents from around the world, turned into the sad sound of a broom sweeping out an empty space. Our father had also been attending the Unity School for Christianity for a few years, but decided not to become a minister after all. We were relieved, having felt like imposters the whole time he was enrolled. He wasn't even a Christian to begin with, but a gently non-practicing Muslim. He didn't do anything like fasting or getting down on his knees 5 times a day. Our mother had given up the stern glare of her Lutheran ancestors, raising my brother and me in the Vedanta Society of St. Louis. When anyone asked what we were, I said Hindu. We had a Swami and sandalwood incense. It was all over our heads, but we liked it and didn't feel very attracted to the idea of churches and collection baskets and chatty parish goodwill. Now and then, just to keep things balanced, we attended the Unity Sunday School. My teacher said I was lucky my father came from the same place Jesus came from. It was a passport to notoriety. She invited me to bring artifacts for show and tell. I wrapped a red and white keffiyeh around my friend Jimmy's curly blonde head while the girls in lacy socks giggled behind their hands. I told about my father coming to America from Palestine on the boat and throwing his old country clothes overboard before docking at Ellis Island. I felt relieved he'd kept a few things, like the keffiyeh and its black braided band. Secretly, it made me mad to have lost the blue pants from Jericho with the wide cuffs he told us about. I liked standing in front of the group talking about my father's homeland. Stories felt like elastic bands that could stretch and stretch. Big fans purred inside their metal shells. I held up a string of olive wood camels. I didn't tell our teacher about the Vedanta Society. We were growing up ecumenical, though I wouldn't know that word till a long time later in college. One night, I heard my father say to my mother in the next room, "Do you think they'll be confused when they grow up?" and knew he was talking about us. My mother, bless her, knew we wouldn't be. She said, at least we're giving them a choice. I didn't know then that, more clearly than all the stories of Jesus, I'd remember the way our Hindu Swami said a single word 3 times. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Our father was an excellent speaker. He stood behind the pulpits and podiums easily, delivering gracious lectures on the Holy Land and the Palestinian question. He was much in demand during the Christmas season. I think that's how he had fallen into the ministerial swoon. While he spoke, my brother and I moved toward the backs of the gathering halls, hovering over and eyeing the tables of canapes and tiny tarts, slipping a few into our mouths or pockets. What next? Our lives were entering a new chapter, but I didn't know its title yet. We had never met our Palestinian grandmother, Siti Khadra, or seen Jerusalem, where our father had grown up, or followed the rocky, narrow alleyways of the Via Dolorosa, or eaten an olive in its own neighborhood. Our mother hadn't either. The Arabic customs we knew had been filtered through the fine net of folk tales. We did not speak Arabic, though the lilt of the language was familiar to us, our father's endearments, his musical blessings before meals, but that language had never lived in our mouths. And that's where we were going, to Jerusalem. We shipped our car, a wide golden Impala, over on a boat. We would meet up with it later. The first plane flight of my whole life was the night flight out of New York City across the ocean. I was 14 years old. Every glittering light in every skyscraper looked like a period at the end of the sentence. Goodbye, our lives. We stopped in Portugal for a few weeks. We were making a gradual transition. We stopped in Spain and Italy and Egypt, where the pyramids shocked me by sitting right on the edge of the giant city of Cairo, not way out in the desert as I had imagined them. While we waited for our baggage to clear customs, I stared at 6 tall African men in brilliantly patterned dashikis, negotiating with an Egyptian customs agent, and realized I did not even know how to say thank you in Arabic. How was this possible? The most elemental and important of human phrases in my father's own tongue had evaded me till now. I tugged on his sleeve, but he was busy with visas and passports. Daddy, I said. Daddy, I have to know. Daddy, tell me. Daddy, why didn't we ever learn? An African man adjusted his turban. Always thereafter, the word shukran, so simple, with a little roll in the middle, would conjure up the vast African baggage, the brown boxes looped and looped in African twine. We stayed 1 or 2 nights at the Old Shepherd's Hotel downtown, but couldn't sleep due to the heat and honking traffic beneath our windows. So our father moved us to the famous Mena House Hotel next to the pyramids. We rode camels for the first time, and our mother received a dozen blood-red roses at her hotel room from a rug vendor who apparently liked her pale brown ponytail. The belly dancer at the hotel restaurant twined a gauzy pink scarf around my brother's astonished 10-year-old head as he tapped his knee in time to her music. She bobbled her giant cleavage under his nose, her huge bosoms prickled by sequins and sweat. Back in our rooms, we laughed until we fell asleep. Later that night, my brother and I both awakened, burning with fever and deeply nauseated, though nobody ever threw up. We were so sick that a doctor hung a quarantine sign in Arabic and English on our hotel room door that next day. Did he know something we didn't know? I kept waiting to hear that we had malaria or typhoid, but no dramatic disease was ever mentioned. We lay in bed for a week. The aged doctor tripped over my suitcase every time he entered to take our temperatures. We smothered our laughter. Shukran, I would say. But as soon as he left, to my brother, I feel bad. How do you feel? I feel really, really bad. I think I'm dying. I think I'm already dead. At night we heard the sound and lights show from the pyramids drifting across the desert air to our windows. We felt our lives stretching out across 1,000 miles. The pharaohs stomped noisily through my head and churning belly. We had eaten spaghetti in the restaurant. I would not be able to eat spaghetti again for years. Finally, we appeared in the restaurant, thin and weakly smiling, and ordered the famous Mena House sorhaba, lentil soup, as my brother nervously scanned the room for the belly dancer. Maybe she wouldn't recognize him now. In those days, Jerusalem, which was then a divided city, had an operating airport on the Jordanian side. My brother and I remember flying in upside down, or in a plane dramatically tipped, but it may have been the effect of our medicine. The land reminded us of a dropped canvas, graceful brown hillocks and green patches. Small and provincial, the airport had just 2 runways, and the first thing I observed as we climbed down slowly from the stuffy plane was all my underwear was strewn across one of them. There were my flowered cotton briefs, and my pink panties, and my slightly embarrassing ragged ones, and my extra training bra alive and visible in the breeze. Somehow my suitcase had popped open in the hold and dropped its contents the minute the men pried open the cargo door. So the first thing I did on the home soil of my father was recollect my underwear, down on my knees, the posture of prayer over that ancient holy land. Our relatives came to see us at a hotel. Our grandmother was very short. She wore a long, thickly embroidered Palestinian dress, had a musical, high-pitched voice, and a low, guttural laugh. She kept touching our heads and faces as if she couldn't believe we were there. I had not yet fallen in love with her. Sometimes you don't fall in love with people immediately, even if they're your own grandmother. Everyone seemed to think we were all too thin. We moved into a second-story flat in a stone house 8 miles north of the city, among fields and white stones and wandering sheep. My brother was enrolled in the Friends Girls' School, and I was enrolled in the Friends Boys' School in the town of Ramallah a few miles farther north. It was all a little confused. But the girls' school offered grades 1 through 8 in English, and high school continued at the boys' school. Most local girls went to the Arabic-speaking schools after 8th grade. I was a freshman, one of 7 girl students among 200 boys, which would cause me problems a month later. I was called in from the schoolyard at lunchtime to the office of our counselor, who wore shoes so pointed and tight her feet bulged out pinkly on top. "You will not be talking to them any more," she said. She rapped on the desk with a pencil for emphasis. "To whom?" "All the boy students at this institution. It is inappropriate behavior. From now on, you will speak only with the girls." "But there are only 6 other girls, and I like only one of them." My friend was Anna, from Italy, whose father ran a small factory that made matches. I'd visited it once with her. It felt risky to walk the aisles among a million filled matchboxes. Later, we visited the factory that made olive oil soaps and stacked them in giant pyramids to dry. "No, thank you," I said. "It's ridiculous to say that girls should only talk to girls. Did I say anything bad to a boy? Did anyone say anything bad to me? They're my friends. They're like my brothers. I won't do it, that's all." The counselor conferred with the headmaster, and they called a taxi. I was sent home with a little piece of paper requesting I transfer to a different school. The charge? Insolence. My mother, startled to see me home early and on my own, stared out the window when I told her. My brother came home from his school as usual, full of whistling and notebooks. "Did anyone tell you not to talk to girls?" I asked him. He looked at me as if I'd gone goofy. He was too young to know the troubles of the world. He couldn't even imagine them. "You know what I've been thinking about?" he said. "A piece of cake. That puffy, white, layered cake with icing, like they have at birthday parties in the United States. Wouldn't that taste good right now?" Our mother said she was thinking about mayonnaise. You couldn't get it in Jerusalem. She tried to make it, and it didn't work. I felt too gloomy to talk about food. My brother said, "Let's go let Abu Miriam's chickens out." That's what we always did when we felt sad. We let our fussy landlord's red and white chickens loose to flap round the yard happily, puffing their wings. Even when Abu Miriam shouted and waggled his cane and his wife waved a dish towel, we knew the chickens were thanking us. My father went with me to the St. Tarmashant's Armenian School, a solemnly ancient stone school tucked deep in the Armenian quarter of the old city of Jerusalem. It was another world in there. He had already called the school officials on the telephone and tried to enroll me, though they didn't want to. Their school was for Armenian students only, kindergarten through 12th grade. Classes were taught in 3 languages, Armenian, Arabic, and English, which was why I needed to go there. Although most Arab students at other schools were learning English, I needed a school where classes were actually taught in English. Otherwise, I would have been staring out the windows triple the usual amount. The head priest wore a long robe and a tall cone-shaped hat. He said, "Excuse me, please, but your daughter, she's not an Armenian, even a small amount?" "Not at all," said my father. "But in case you didn't know, there is a stipulation in the educational code books of this city that says no student may be rejected solely on the basis of ethnic background. And if you don't accept her, we will alert the proper authorities." They took me, but the principal wasn't happy about it. The students, however, seemed glad to have a new face to